Hello and welcome to our inaugural episode of the Digital Experience Revolution. I'm Charles Araujo, and here with me,
Dr. Frank Renito, and always kicking things off is always fun. This is our first show. This should be good.
and you, if you're tuning in, which obviously you are, you may be wondering what the heck this is and why we're even doing it. And I guess to a certain extent, this is going to be an exploration of our own. We're going to be figuring this out together as we go. But here's the big message, and we're going to talk a little bit about the research we're doing that Frank is leading up for us. But there's this momentum, this transformation that is happening. And you know, of course, we're with the Institute for Digital Transformation. So transformation is our business. But even in that context, what we're seeing right now is crazy. It is just so fantastic. And it deserves some focus about exactly what's happening. It all centers, as the name might imply, around the digital experience, the customer experience, but specifically how we're enabling that through the technology. So really, this is all, as I mentioned, is rooted in this research that we're doing. And so Frank, why don't you just walk us through a little bit about what that looks like?
The research that we're doing is, as Charlie said, going through the digital experience supply chain. And what we want to do is first really find out from that supply chain, what are the capabilities that enterprises need or should have to get through the supply chain. Once we find those capabilities, we can map those to working with technical suppliers or vendors to see what technical capabilities are out there and what gaps exist in the technical capabilities supporting the functional capabilities to support the enterprises going through the supply chain. So that is really, really new. And as Charlie said, what we're seeing is the capabilities that we might have focused on or teased out 6 months ago might not be the capabilities we see today or 6 months from now. So as more people, as we get into the trend line here, which we're going to talk about soon, as we get into the trend line, more people working from home, and as even as an example, as some companies are laying off folks, places like Amazon are hiring. So it's a very, very dynamic and interesting trend, Charlie.
So we're going to go ahead and put a link in the show notes to our research kind of prospectus that explains what this all is about. But the general idea behind the digital experience supply chain is that the customer experience now has become the driver of value for organizations. And that is leading to them to need to transform their business models to curate and create and deliver that experience. And that demands that they transform their operating models and then ultimately transforming their work models. And so what we're going to be focused on is exploring all these connections and how they line up. And the way we'd like to do that every week is that we're going to basically talk about an emerging topic that is impacting this in some way. And then we're going to talk about kind of what we're seeing, as Frank mentioned, on the technical supply side of this, right? How vendors and how the vendor community is responding to this, and then where this all connects back to the research. So let's just dive in with this week's trending topic. As Frank mentioned, talking about, is the office as we know it dead? Now, any of you who've been my fans for a while, you might have picked up my reference here, right? I opened my very first book, 8 years ago now, right, Frank?
Yeah. Incidentally, Charlie, that book is still extremely timely. The Quantum Age of IT. Just a quick plug for you. That's a great book.
Well, I appreciate that, and shockingly, it's still selling. I actually just got a royalty check, but anyhow, I opened that book with "IT as we know it is dead," and it's interesting. I mean, I couldn't help but sort of go there when I've been reading these headlines. So CNBC had an article out talking about Alphabet CEOs, talking about how by the end of the year, they maybe are going to be back to 15, 20, maybe 30% people back in the office. Twitter and Square have come out and said they're going to be permanently work from home. There is an article in The Atlantic that is titled "Never Go Back to the Office." And so there's all of these kind of conversations going on in the press about, hey, is the office dead?
Yeah, and I just saw literally 20 minutes ago, breaking news 20 minutes ago on my news feed, that Facebook announced that they fully expect that 50% of their workforce will work from home or work remotely. So, I mean, things are trending quickly on this.
So it'd be easy to believe that that's it. In fact, I couldn't find it, but I read an article somewhere. Is there a coming office, a commercial real estate apocalypse coming in New York with everyone moving out? And yet at the same time, we were on a call with our Institute fellows. So we have an entire team of fellows of the Institute for Digital Transformation. And one of our fellows by the name of Terry Bennett was talking about how he is working with a bunch of executives at companies right now. And he's seeing they're kind of two groups where some of them are like just itching to go back to the way things, just get back to normal, back to the way. And no change, right? Going right back to the way it was. And then this other group that is sort of like embracing all of this. And so here's my question for you, Frank. I'm just kind of curious, what's your take on this? Do you think is this all hype? Is this selling magazines and click streams, or is this where this is going?
Well, what I think is happening is that companies realize that, and even the employees realize that you can be just as effective working from home, or working remotely. So you might miss the physical company of people, and we probably have always known that you can be just as productive or self-actualized working remotely, but maybe the pandemic, so to speak, this trend has broken that wall down and say, yeah, we actually can, and maybe there's a culture change there to allow us to do that. So we could always do it, but we just didn't know it. And some of the research we're doing on snapshot research, kind of looking at this from another perspective, we asked a question of various participants: do you miss being in the physical company of coworkers? And it's pretty spread across the board. I would say that at least a full 1/4 of people who answered that question are neutral to that. They may or may not. It's not a strong trend either way. They miss the physical company of coworkers. So I think we could always do it. We just found out we could.
So first of all, I think you're absolutely right. I think that, people have called this the greatest work from home experiment ever. I totally buy that. And I think that this idea that we couldn't work from home for some reason, that's been shattered.
I totally agree.
But that said, I don't buy for a minute that the office is dead. I don't think for 1 second that we're not going to be coming back. Here's what I do think, though. I think that it's going to usher in some fundamental shifts in the way we work and the way we function, the way we're organized, what those offices are used for and how they look. I don't think we're going to go back to the way it was. So I think Terry Bennett's executive that is just itching to just flip the switch back on.
Yeah.
He probably has another thing coming. But I think that it's going to be this interesting kind of transition. And I don't know if you have any ideas of what you think that new normal might look like, but because I don't really know.
Yeah, I don't know. I think this is happening so quickly. I think we're going to have to see how that fleshes out. I think there's going to be I agree with you. There's going to be some place for the office, as we say, being in the physical presence of people. But from a productivity standpoint, you're probably less productive in the physical company of your coworkers in an office. But there's probably other intangible or even some tangible things we'll need to find out of being in the office. What do you get from that? Is there more, ideation when you're in the physical company of people as opposed to on a Zoom call, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating. All right, well, it's time to move on to our next part of this, and we're calling this, at least for now, we're calling this Tech Notes. And this is really wanting to dive into what is the tech community doing? Technology companies, whether they be long-standing tech companies or startups, how are they kind of playing in all of these transitions that are happening? And so we're going to try to run through 3 companies that we're interacting with every week and kind of give you a little tidbit of who they are. And of course, we'll have that in the show notes as well. So the first I want to talk about is a company called Vive. They're headquartered in Melbourne, Australia, and they're I guess I'd call them a next generation content and knowledge management system. They kind of call themselves a knowledge ecosystem, although I think they're still kind of trying to, in fairness, it's difficult to explain sort of what they do. But really what it is, it's about this contextual and interactive way of dealing with knowledge. They have a chatbot that kind of exposes it. But here's what I love about what they're doing is they're focused on the customer experience side of this. When most people talk about knowledge management, It's all about sort of the internal consumption of that knowledge or using it in things like support functions and what have you. And yes, that's part of it, but it's really about empowering employees for the customer experience. And surprise, surprise, what I was just talking to their CMO, and he was saying that during all of this COVID-19 craziness, that their phone is ringing off the hook, that people are just realizing how important this connection and this knowledge is. And I think it actually ties to what we were just talking about. This whole work from home thing is elevating the need for this type of collaboration and interaction. So
Right. We
interesting stuff.
actually, it's a good point, Charlie. We talk about that in one of the in our readiness model. There's the need in digital readiness for a common digital space for people to interact. And I think we're seeing this amplifies here. So it looks like our readiness framework was tied in with this as well, in addition to the research.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Absolutely. So, all right, so let's move on to the next one. The next company is a company called Lenses.io, and they're like the polar opposite here. They're a hardcore tech company at their core. Really what they are, they're an abstraction and orchestration layer between data apps and the infrastructure that's necessary to support that. And they really focus on enabling real-time data-driven apps and really kind of pushing the accessibility of these very complex data streams deeper in the organization. I mean, I think that's sort of where they're evolving to. What I really like about what they're doing is it's really about making data and data-driven apps more accessible from at any point in the experience. Something that they share a belief with me, with us, I think, Frank, that in order to deliver the kind of experiences that we're talking about, it's all going to be driven by data. But one of the things that, of course, companies that go down this road are finding is that when you start dealing with all of this data you need to deliver this kind of breakout, knockdown, crazy experience, it gets really hard to deal with. And so even though they're a highly technical organization in terms of their solutions, what it's really about is helping organizations deal with the fact that managing all that real-time data and all those real-time data streams to serve that experience in a meaningful and sustainable way is tough, and they want to help organizations do that better. So I love what they're doing, even though it's more technical than I would normally kind of.
That's really interesting because data is emotionless, right? Data doesn't care about your emotions. So somewhere in there, we need to have some sort of emotion because data doesn't care about your feelings. It is what it is. You want to know how you played on the golf course? Look at your scorecard, right? There's no emotion there.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting is you have to connect it, right? And that's the context. But what I think was really interesting with what they're doing is that where a lot of systems have trouble is that if all I'm dealing with is retrospective data, it's really hard to be reactive in the moment of that experience, in that moment of engagement. And so we need to get real-time data, right? The moment it's happening, but that's really, really hard to do.
Yeah.
And the systems, and I won't get into the technical details, but basically the systems that exist within kind of the tech world to do this are very complex and sometimes a little kludgy. And so their solutions help streamline that.
Right.
Okay, so the third company is a company that I just am fascinated by, a company called Behavioral Signals. And they, it's almost hard to explain what they do as well, because they're basically a cognitive platform that has a lot of different use cases. They're definitely
the mood ring of the digital era. Is that what we're talking about?
You have no idea how close you are on that. So I'm not going to talk about everything they do because there's a whole lot to it, but I want to talk about this one use case that they're bringing to market.
Yeah.
And here's what they're doing is that they are basically taking voice calls,
right,
and they're ingesting the data from that, but from the tonal context of the voice patterns, not the content. Meaning you can literally give them something in a language that they don't understand. They are not doing natural language processing, is what we'd expect. They're simply listening to the tone of the voice and using that to understand intent, to gain insights from. And so they're applying it right now in loan collections, like debt collections.
right.
And here's what's fascinating is that they're simply using that data to match it to the agent who is most empathetically aligned to that debt holder. And they're seeing amazing results in being able to collect more money. But here's what's most important about it. Not only is collecting more money, they're generating a better experience with that debt owner, the person who owes the money. So when this all gets said and done, they still have a customer, right? I mean, it is just amazing technology. What I love about it is that it sort of breaks the paradigm. It's not about understanding the words. It's about looking exactly what you just said a second ago about that emotion.
Yeah, and that's really interesting. It's almost a little scary too, because communication is built on a lot of different layers, and that is body language, tone of voice, position of your head, things of that nature, how you physically interact. And I'm assuming, by using some sort of AI and insights into their tone of voice, that's actually pretty scary that you can start getting emotions in this conversation without having a human interpret those emotions. And that to me is really cutting, but might even be a little scary.
It is. I mean, and in fact, I think that's one of the things that they're going to have to grapple with. I call it the creepy factor, right? But the hard part, but here's the thing. The customers, their customers that are using this with their, the people that owe money, they're getting a better result, right? This isn't about, it's not about getting some secret insight that if I say these words that I'm going to be able to bring more money at you. It's about simply making the connection between two people who are going to have a better opportunity to have a good relationship. I mean, it is absolutely fascinating technology. And here, so I'm sorry, go on.
No, I'm almost seeing Eric Burns' ego states there, where parent, child, adult, and you want to be talking on the same levels and being able to get the insights from the tone of voice. If somebody is talking on the phone parentally, then maybe you want to match them with somebody who deals well with a parent. Somebody's acting like a child by the tone of voice and looking at those ego states. That is.
God knows that would be me when I owe money. I'm like, oh. So yeah, no, and honestly, I don't know exactly what it's doing in terms of the matches, but it is just a fascinating piece of technology. And here's what I think all three of these have in common. All three of these are dealing with what I'll call the deep end of the customer experience, right? And I rant about this periodically, that when we talk about the customer experience, or when the industry talks about it, it's too often synonymous with the buying experience. And really, all three of these companies are bringing things to bear that are really about the customer experience after the purchase, right? Whether it's Panviva and them enabling the ability to capture this knowledge and to use it in support of the experience post-acquisition, or if it's Lenses taking all of this data and using it in real time to interact through those ongoing engagements, or whether it's behavioral signals in the case of what we just talked about. It's all about this deep end of the customer experience. And what I think is so fascinating about both this and then the story that we're talking about the offices, about how these really all intersect with this research we're doing. It's amazing.
Yeah, exactly. And I really am anxious to find out, to really look at what we find in this research, because it's what we find out today may not be true tomorrow or 6 months from now. And that's why we have to keep doing this over and over again and stay on top of it, because digital transformation is a journey, never ends.
Yeah.
And we have to be aware of the customer experience.
Well, and what I think is fascinating about this is, and I think we're going to, week after week, when we have these conversations, Frank, I think we're going to see this play out. And that is that the reason that the digital experience supply chain is what we're calling it, but this idea of this cyclical journey of constant transformation across effectively every dimension of how organizations work, that's what we're going to see. And we're going to continue to see them intertwined. And I think, part of the reason I love what we're doing here is it's about trying to get out of the approach that so many have taken of trying to put everyone in these neat little technology boxes. I don't know these three companies are wildly different. They're all very interrelated to how we are seeing the world. And yet they wouldn't end up anywhere near each other if, in any kind of a box or map that we try to put them in. Right.
Right.
And that's what I think this research is going to be so impactful around, is helping us understand how all this connects.
And what I'm hoping to really find out is, when we look at the capabilities across the supply chain, even though these companies are different, the capabilities are consistent. You still need the same capability. That's kind of what I'm thinking is my hypothesis, that the capabilities will be consistent. but the product or the way you go about it may be different.
Yeah, it's interesting. I often talk about the fact that enterprise leaders right now are facing the tsunami of technology crashing onto their shores, and they have to figure out how to put the pieces together in a way that's uniquely capable for them to drive some kind of competitive advantage. And what I agree with you. I think what we're going to see through this research is that those pathways are going to be through these capabilities that we start mapping out through this research. So I'm excited with it. So I think with that, we need to wrap this up. So Frank, kind of what's your big takeaway? Any big aha as we kind of covered all this ground? What was your big aha moment here?
My big aha moment is a scene from The Wizard of Oz when Dorothy wants to get home. And the good witch says, "You always had that power. Just click your heels together." I think we always had the power and ability and productivity to work remotely. We just needed to be told that, yeah, you can, and prove that. That's my big aha.
So my big aha when I look at this is, as long as I've been in the technology space, I continue to be awestruck by how fast it moves, the next innovation around the corner. Really, all three of these companies are doing just amazing things that were all but impossible just a few years ago. And so it's one of those things that I hold on to as I look forward into the future, to just have some humility to remember that none of us really have any idea. We're looking at it the best we can and trying to do our best to find this pathway forward. So okay, well, that wraps it up for us. Thank you so much for joining us on our inaugural voyage of the digital experience revolution. I hope you tune in next week to join us, but until then, I'm Charles Araujo.
And I'm Dr. Frank Renito. See you next week.